on the headlines. We're really pleased to see such an amazing turnout and also to have such a great queue outside. So thank you all for coming along on this cold autumn evening. So this is a collaboration between the Friends of MSF Society, Medicine, the St Andrews Foreign Affairs Conference and the Economics Society. We had originally wanted to do a debate panel for this talk, but we were absolutely honoured to find out that we could have Gunhilde come, who is an MSF field worker. She's a nurse who's been working out in Sierra Leone and Guinea, and she had the opportunity to come over to St Andrews to talk to us. So we've slightly changed the format of the event, but for the better, and we're really honoured to have you here. So Medicine is the Global Health Society of St Andrews. We aim to educate, advocate and act on global and local health inequalities. This semester we're focusing on the Millennium Development Goals, which are 8 goals which by 2015 we're aiming to eradicate poverty.
Improve maternal health. Combat HIV, AIDS, malaria, and other diseases.
Combat HIV, AIDS, malaria, and viruses. Ensure environmental sustainability.
So Medicine's been covering these 8 goals in various different ways throughout the semester, and please do look out for our events in the future. But for goal number 6, we're using this event on Ebola. So goal number 6 is to combat HIV, AIDS, malaria and other diseases. Thus far, the Ebola virus has claimed 4,000 lives, so we've decided that currently this is the disease topic that we'd like to focus on. So Medicine speaker is Janet Coxing, who we're very pleased to have here tonight. She is an experienced malaria researcher in the School of Medicine. In 1991 she went to Malaysia, and in 1999 she set up the Borneo Malaria Research Foundation. She came back to St Andrews in 2012, but she's originally from Belfast. We're very pleased to have her today, and she's going to be looking at not only the medical side of the Ebola crisis, but also the political and economical implications of it. So, please, a round of applause for
So first of all, I'd like to thank you all so much and Medicine for inviting me tonight. It's an amazingly successful event. So thank you all for coming, and these guys are just so cool. That's very good. So what I want to say is, first of all, I searched the literature, and this is the academic literature. New England Journal of Medicine, Lancet, WHO, and tried to put together a little picture of what is happening in this current outbreak of Ebola. I do a little bit of the history of Ebola outbreaks and see if we can come together and see some reason why this one is just so huge. But I do want to stress that anything I say is my own interpretation of the published literature, and I will make citations along the way, or you'll see citations along the way. And my views don't represent the views of any other person or any institution. So I'm absolving myself and everybody else of anything I say. Okay? So, there's a lovely word in Scotland called out with, and I've never heard of it before, but it says a lot. And so what I wanted to do is look at Ebola without all of the hype. And so the first time Ebola emerged and that was discovered was in 1976. Now that doesn't mean to say it didn't happen before, it was the first time that it was described and discovered. And this was in Zaire. And so based on that outbreak, teams went in, and they're called like outbreak SWAT teams. They really go in heavy-handed, and they seal off the area. They try to contact all the people who have met people with Ebola. They educate, they treat, but essentially they shut areas right down until the last case has been either resolved in one way or another. And so following that outbreak, they came up with a set of plans for the future based on what it was they found in 1976. Now, for anybody who's not very good at math, that's 38 years ago. I think that is anyway. And so what they said was they had to stop transmission during the outbreaks, search out and control the epidemics, make sure that the neighbouring states didn't become infected, that they were able to control for that. They were wanting to establish national control centres, and that's within the countries that might be affected. They wanted to document the clinical features because nobody knew anything about Ebola before that. Their goal was to obtain large amounts of serum from people who had recovered, and that was to be used to treat new cases. And that's quite an ambitious goal, but in fact it's actually happening right now. Serum from people who have recovered is being used to protect others. And the other thing is to look for the reservoir of infection. Where did this virus actually come from? And so, in the 38 years, scientists such as me who work on zoonotic diseases haven't got a clue. They think it's the fruit bat. They don't know if there's an amplifying intermediary host. What they do know is that people who become infected, the index cases, tend to have had some contact with either bushmeat or butchering bushmeat, and including humans. One of the other groups of non-human primates to become infected and get high virus titers are chimpanzees and some of the other primates that are non-human primates that and monkeys that people would eat. Now, you might think that that's really strange that people would eat bushmeat regularly, but there's no other source of protein. The other thing is people would find a sick animal and actually capture that and eat it as well, knowing full well that there may be some risk involved, but food comes before everything else when you're starving and when you're poor. So at this point in time, what we think is that the fruit bats are a reservoir that have low-level virus titers. They probably don't get sick, but we don't know. They, for some reason, will come in close contact with other animals living in the forest. And in this case, we're most interested in monkeys and non-human primates. People then will be coming in contact with them probably through butchering bushmeat. And then we have an index case. The thing about Ebola is it seems not to be terribly fussy about which cells it infects in the human host. And the virus titers get extremely high. Now that's very different to something like, say, influenza, where it targets cells of the respiratory system. Whereas this virus seems to be just a little bit more non-specific. It's probably been adapted to live in something that's not human, and so is behaving a little bit differently. And that's one of the main problems with the outbreak. When people get sick, their friends care for them, or they go to healthcare services. And in fact, their virus load is so high that virtually any body fluid that is from that patient, whether it be sweat or any other thing, usually has virus in there. And that makes carers very much at risk. So it's all to do with the virus. Now, through time there have been outbreaks, sporadic outbreaks, and each time in the early days they found out something new. So in 1983 they published and they said, actually people who care for people with Ebola are very much at risk. We need to really make sure we understand the outbreak procedures and go in and protect people who need protecting. Then in 2011 there was another outbreak, and that was in Uganda. And this time there were 131 cases. But again, that was actually contained very quickly. And this one was contained by the local governments. So we know that the outbreaks have been occurring through history. We know that they can be contained. We know that the people on the ground in the countries themselves have got teams engaged to try to recognise an outbreak within a time frame, it's usually 3 to 4 months from the index case until people realise that something's going on, to shutting down the viral spread. Now, in the outbreak in Uganda, the green bars are a little foci of infection because one of the people in that outbreak was very famous, locally very prominent. And in fact, they were responsible for infecting 20 people because when they were ill, and when you work in communities where elders are respected, where there are people in the community, people would go to see them in hospital. They would go to the burial. And in fact, these, have we got a pointer? No. The green bars are contacts of just one person. And that one person infected 20. Obviously, he didn't mean to. So it has to be said that contact is very important. Restricting contact is very important. But sometimes things just happen and you can't predict them. And so I've shown this to show that during the past, I don't know how many years that is now, is that 20? Since 1995, we have had outbreaks with 1 or 2 people, but we've also had quite big outbreaks. 250 or 315 in DRC, 143 in the Republic of Congo, in Uganda, 425. These are quite big outbreaks, but they stayed within that time frame. The index case, the 3 to 4 months before it's recognised, oh, there's something going on. Because in Africa, it's not unusual for people to die of hemorrhagic type illnesses. Even malaria has some hemorrhagic type manifestations in sometimes. So you would have, say, maybe 10, 12 people dotted around the place, not really recognised, but as soon as you get a little focus, people recognise it, and then the teams would go in with outbreak control, with all of the gear, tracing contacts, and they shut it down. So you can see in the past, it's not unusual to have about 400 people in an outbreak that is still controlled. And so the outbreak detection isn't very much different to 1976. So there's usually this little lag period, there would be an index case, and then there would be a period of time for more people to become infected so that it could be noticed by the healthcare professionals and the public health teams. It's a classic response. So you want a good way to identify cases, you want to isolate the patients, you want to protect those caring for them and those performing burials, and then you want to trace the contacts and monitor them to make sure that anyone who comes down with fever, that you actually isolate them as well. And you can control the outbreak. And so by March this year, it was known that 111 people had come down with Ebola. And the first cases were in this area where I can't pronounce any of that, but the little red area. You can see quite pertinently that it borders other countries. So the area is in Guinea, but it borders Liberia and Sierra Leone. Now, the reason that we know this outbreak was noted is because there were people there, molecular biologists, who took the virus from 15 patients, did DNA sequencing, and were able to show how like the other Ebola viruses in the past were to this current outbreak. So the international community knew in March 2014 that there was an Ebola outbreak in this region. So keep that, remember that little bit of information. Okay, so with the molecular biology tools, the red positions in red are the current outbreak, and they're a little bit ancestral to all of the other outbreaks of the Zaire virus, but they're very, very similar. So what we deduced from that was that in the region, there are probably quite a number of virus genotypes that belong to the Zaire group, but they behave fairly similarly. And so that just means that there are more reservoirs probably than we thought before, but these jungles are very, very diverse, and so that's not exactly surprising if you're a molecular biologist. Now, going back a bit to this list of places that had Ebola outbreaks in the past. So this is the same table that we took the other information from, and it's from the CDC. So in May 2011, 1 person, Uganda 11, Democratic Republic of the Congo 36. I don't know why the CDC didn't start the current outbreak from December 2013, because that's actually when it started. And that's 2013, December to March 2014, 111 people. But in the interim, there's 4,655. Now we know the procedures we need to do to close down this virus. We know how to control it. And the big question is, what happened? Why was it not closed down? Why was it not controlled before it ever got to this horrendous figure of 4,000, which was in September, I believe, and I believe now 8,000, I think you said today? 8,000 cases at the moment, and it just keeps growing. The larger the number, the more difficult it is to contain, and it becomes extremely expensive and logistically very, very difficult. So in September, these are the most recent map I could find. There's probably more out there. Is there a pointer in that? Maybe not. So this is a map of the area, and it takes into account the cases from December 2013 until September this year. The red dots, the size of the red dots show the size of the outbreaks in the areas marked, and they are recent cases, and then all cases are the grey areas. And you can see that it is extremely widespread. Now, one of the reasons for that is because the virus started out in an area which has borders. When you have that, you have healthcare systems that probably don't communicate well. So somebody in Zaire, in the healthcare service, might think one thing. Somebody in Guinea might think something else. And probably communication wasn't that terribly good. The other thing is, these are among the poorest places in the world. They've been at war. Their healthcare services are completely broken down. And it was really a disaster waiting to happen. Now, again, in 1976, and I hate to go back these 40-odd years, international teams went in to help. And so I don't know why that was. Did the countries invite the international teams? Or was there no mechanism to invite? Or what it was that happened? But there seems to me to have been something that has broken down in this current outbreak. Okay. Now, then we get on to modern methods to control things, so vaccine development. It turns out that in Canada, America, I think this country as well, people had Ebola vaccines in their fridges. They had developed vaccines, recombinant vaccines, the same way they would do it for influenza and any other thing. Now, why those vaccines weren't rolled out is probably an economic thing as well. It's very hard to get funding for research these days. And if I went to a funding agency and said, I want money to develop a vaccine for the latest strain of influenza, the money would pour in. If I went and said, I would like some money to develop a vaccine for zoonotic malaria, which is what I work on, they'd probably laugh at me. And I think it's probably the same for Ebola, because history told us that there were outbreaks. The maximum number so far were 400 people. Probably half or 30% at least of those people survived. It was far away from the areas that dish out funding. And it wasn't a huge priority. But it's a priority now. And so this is the virus, and again, I wish I had a little pointer, but it doesn't matter, you have to bear with me. So this is one virus particle. The inside red bit is actually the nucleic acid. That's what holds the genome of the virus to make the virus what it is. I think it has 6 or 7 genes or something like that. Viruses rely on host cells to replicate. They can't replicate on their own. They need a means to get inside the host cell. And in this particular case, it's those little purple projections or spikes on the surface of the viral particle that is responsible for attachment and entry into the host cell. And they're made of glycoprotein. And for some reason, the Ebola virus is not that diverse. And these glycoproteins don't change a whole lot. And so people who had an interest in this virus were able to take the genes for these proteins, put them inside viral vectors that are used normally for other recombinant viruses, deliver that to, I think they've done most work on non-human primate models, and discover that yes, we can make antibody to the surface antigen. If you've got antibody to that glycoprotein on the surface, that little spike that's responsible for the virus particle to attach and enter the host cell, if you have antibodies to that, they coat the surface of the virus and effectively neutralize it, block all of those spikes, and the virus is therefore ineffective. So the vaccine could work very well, but it wasn't rolled out. And so the WHO had an emergency meeting, I think it was in September, and now they're trying to rush this through. Normally to roll out a virus, you need to make the recombinant virus particle, your vaccine particle. You need to put in the protein you want to put in that vaccine vector, and then you need to do trials. And normally that takes an awful long time and an awful lot of money. So they've decided to now rush this forward. They are trying to get phase 1 trials, and that's just taking a small number of people, inoculating them with the vaccine virus, then measuring response. Is it safe? And do you get an antibody titer that will actually neutralize Ebola virus, and they can do that with ELISA tests very nicely. Then they're planning to do a phase 2A, which is taking a larger number of people, giving them the virus, and then looking for efficacy and safety again among age groups and a much larger number. And these will be people who are then immunocompromised and all age groups, including children, but they're not at risk from Ebola. Then for phase 2B, they're planning to then offer the virus to people who are at risk and do a much larger study. So anyone who's working with people or at risk will be offered to participate in the study, but they'll also incorporate a much larger group of people and see how they get on. Now normally these trials are randomized with placebo, but in this case they're not going to do that. They're just going to use the vaccine and the vaccine only. They'll just compare it with vaccinated, and they'll vaccinate really whoever wants to be part of the study. They're hoping to roll that out in 2015 early on. But they're going to have to bulk up these vaccines That means growing up the vector virus and see how they get on. Now by 2015, and I can't do the math, but I think there would be an awful lot more Ebola cases in West Africa. So while it's a good thing, I think we should, if we have the capability, we should take these things forward. We can't have them sitting in a lab fridge. But also, at the moment, what we need is action, real action, and money and support, because you can't replace this outbreak response. There's people going in, protecting themselves, protecting others, identifying cases, and also following contacts. There's just there's no other way right now. And so then what I did was I read some accounts for people who actually were involved in these outbreaks. And they kind of are, they're a little bit sad in a way. So this is one by a group of physicians who have worked out in West Africa since the current outbreak was really noted to be a real problem. And they're saying, treat with the current tools. These are not fancy gadgets. These are things that have been going on, recommendations that we've known since the last 40 years. And I'm sorry to labour that, but it's quite ridiculous in a way. And so this is a team, and they represent MSF and WHO. What they noticed was supportive care improves survival. Now that doesn't mean to say everybody with Ebola can survive. It's not. It's really a horrible virus, and the virus figures get so high that it is going to be hard to pull people back. But that doesn't mean to say you have to leave them to die. And so what they were saying was that, and this makes sense to everybody in this room, vomiting and diarrhea makes you dehydrated. So you need electrolytes and fluids replaced. For that, it would be nice to have small pieces of equipment just to measure electrolyte balance. They're very cheap. Again, they're ancient. They're not beyond the budgets of the WHO to send to the centres that need them. But instead of that, the place apparently is coming down with PCR machines. Now, PCR machines will help you identify viral particles. So case identification would be now in the 21st century. But it doesn't even need to be there, because you can do it by simple ELISAs as well. You don't need PCR machines, which are costly, which require training, and it takes everybody's eye off the ball, because the ball is to get the outbreak controlled. So the clinicians are understandably frustrated. You would be frustrated too if you were somewhere and you knew that a lot more effort needs to be spent on trying to contain this terrible outbreak. And so this is a terribly busy slide, but again it's quoted from this paper of these people, and all you have to do is read the red words. So this is, it's by Daniel Bosch. He, again, is a clinician who has been out. He's been interviewed by someone from the bulletin of the WHO. You can see border area, remote, impoverished, no health or surveillance infrastructure, difficult, contact tracing, difficult, borders are porous, no system of coordinating, language barriers. Many people who are sick actually run away. They don't want to be traced. They don't want to have people who've contacted them traced. And this is all to do with the infrastructure of those countries having completely broken down because they're war-torn or were war-torn, they're impoverished, and people have lost trust in authority. And so whenever you are trying to contact people, they're not cooperative because they don't trust you anymore. But there is some hope, and there's always something good comes out of everything bad. And in this case, the world has recognised we can't have these impoverished countries anymore. We can't have the World Trade Organization. We can't have trade agreements between rich countries that squeeze out all these other countries. Everybody has to be at the game. And so at least that has been identified, and there has been some commitment to help in the reconstruction plan and put some of the poorest in the world back on the table, on the road to health, where they can live with dignity and without the risk of zoonotic infections that can be and should be properly controlled. And so this is what the CDC has put together. It's quite nice. It's very easy to take in the information. So where the outbreak is, what the likely host is, but from my money, having worked on zoonotic infections, there probably is an amplifying host somewhere within there between the bat and the human. How do you get it? Body fluids, contaminated objects, needles, equipment, infected animals. And this is really the bushmeat story again. The early symptoms, and probably for any of the medics among you will know, but for most people, actually they're very, very non-specific. You could be talking in some ways about malaria, you could be talking about typhoid, you could be talking about other things. It's a little bit difficult to recognise the early parts of the outbreak, and as I said, it usually takes this 3 to 4 months, which is a shame. And then how do people spread it? It really needs someone to be very symptomatic before they'll spread the disease. So you have a wee bit of time to trace the contacts, understand if you think they're probably highly at risk, and then help contain the infection and protect the people. So this was written in August this year. So again, we're all hyped up about Ebola in September and October. But people were very concerned about it in August. People were very concerned about it in March. And I really don't know why the might of the international communities just hasn't honed in on this and done something. But Nathan Wolfe is a very good friend of mine. He's a virus hunter. And he's got sentinel sites across the world to try to identify viral outbreaks before they happen. And that's not Ebola. That's all of the other viruses that wild animals harbour that do them no harm, but that would be very detrimental to human health. And so he's on the ground, he does all this work, and some of his friends actually died in the most recent Ebola outbreak. And so one of the things that he wrote in August, and I couldn't agree more today, is actually what we should be afraid of is not the Ebola virus, but misinformation and fear. Because it's fear among us as Westerners, because we get a bit twitchy, I do too. Oh my God, I hope this thing doesn't come. And fear among the communities who are infected, because they don't really understand. So education and support, money and infrastructure for those people would go a very long way. So thank you all very much.
So I'd just like to thank Dr. Coxing again for that. That was very informative indeed. So right now I was meant to stand up to you and tell you a little bit about MSF. And for those of you that know me, you're probably terrified right now that that is in fact what I'm about to do. But luckily for you, we have found someone much, much better to do it for us. Now, to give you a little bit of an idea of how MSF are looking at this crisis, Dr. Joanne Liu, the president of MSF, has recently said that the international attempt to control this outbreak has been lethally inadequate and that we are losing this battle. 1,700 people have died in MSF structures alone in West Africa, and that's including people who are working there trying to help. And it's really not going very well, to put it lightly. And so, to give you an idea of what it's like to actually be out there, and for someone who has genuinely seen everything that's going on, and has a really good idea of what we need to do, and what we in the West who haven't seen it, we need to think about what's going on. I would like to welcome Gunhilde, who is a nurse who's been working for years with this type of thing up, to just give us a little bit of a hint. So.
Hello everyone. It's amazing to see such a big turnout. I didn't really know what I was getting into when I came here, but this is amazing, and I'm very happy that people are interested in the topic. I don't have a PowerPoint, but I just have some pictures from the field that are going to be running and later, if you have any questions about any of the pictures you see, you can just ask. So my name is Gunnhildur Árnadóttir, Icelandic name, that's difficult to pronounce. I'm a nurse. I have a master's degree in global health from the Karolinska Institute in Stockholm. I've worked for MSF for 2 years now, and I've been on 4 missions. My first mission was as a nurse pharmacist in a small town called Bogila in Central African Republic. Last year I spent 6 months in Patil refugee camp in an emergency project dealing with a seemingly uncontrollable outbreak of hepatitis E. And this year so far I've been on 2 missions to Ebola, which is probably the missions you're most interested in hearing about. I went to Guinea in May. I had heard about the outbreak in March, and I immediately called my career manager, who is the one who is responsible for matching people with missions and sending us out. And I told her I was available in April. I had already booked a trip to Greece over Easter, but I told her after that I can go, no problem. And she told me, well, we're not even sure there's still going to be an outbreak then, so I'll just put you down as interested. Yeah. So if someone would have told us that we'd still be sending people out in October, we probably would have laughed. Since the Ebola outbreak in West Africa was officially declared on March 22nd this year, it has claimed 3,865 lives as of last week. That's the newest number I could find. The outbreak is the largest ever and is currently affecting 3 countries in West Africa, Guinea, Liberia, and Sierra Leone. 2 countries in West Africa are now in the period of counting days because waiting for the 21 days to pass since their last active case. That's Senegal and Nigeria. In the United States of America, there have been confirmed cases. Now contacts of those cases are being traced. A confirmed case in Europe was reported last week with a Spanish nurse being treated for Ebola, and that was the first case that was actually contracted in Europe. The death toll numbers that we see in the media are also greatly underestimated. I can give you an example. In our treatment center in Sierra Leone, we once had 11 people come in at the same time from the same town. Our epidemiologist thought that was a little suspicious, so she went to that town to kind of do her own investigation. When she came to the town, she found out that before these 11 people actually went to the hospital, 28 people already had died in that town without being reported, without being noted anywhere. So the numbers that we see that are actually being registered are much lower than the actual death toll numbers. So back to my story, needless to say, there was still a need in April. So I was off to Brussels for training and then on to Conakry, the capital of Guinea, where I would work as a nurse in Donka Hospital, which is the main hospital in Conakry. Looking back, I don't really know how seriously I was looking at the danger, the seriousness of the disease. This wasn't my first emergency mission, and I thought, hey, this will be easy. And well, at the time, it was, because when I arrived in Conakry, we only had 1 active case, and he was getting better. I only saw 1 confirmed case during that mission. We thought, okay, this is getting under control, we can start closing down this center. We were just waiting, and our 21 days passed, and we started